Last week we had 30 people attend this one, and then the young lady at school. I don't know the last. I don't know if it's for the advertising better or number. How many? I know. I think all of those people have always needed services, but I think we're just getting the word out. Program it. I mean, we used to get 7 people be with it, and then now, I mean, but it was interesting because I realized that. Go check my time. We might have more. Yeah. What was the light? Neon light. But a lot of that. Registered, which is the most we've ever had for this program. Usually, like I said, last series that we did, the first one that I did last year at this we were doing 13 people, and that was like great. So 58 people for this program is much better. But tomorrow we have a lunch and learn, and I think we have about 100 people registered for that, and that one's all online. Yeah. But tomorrow is about LGBTQ plus. Yeah, Dr. Maceo. Yeah, very excited about that one. We have a lot of people interested in that. 2 minutes, and then I'll start. Yeah, that's amazing. So did you get that early for the office? I didn't either. We actually, well, today we have at least 2 people that are out of state that are registered for today. Yeah, just out of state caregivers or people who are professionals that have heard of us through just different channels that we have. Yeah, I think it's $5 for little old Baton Rouge. For really, pretty great. Yeah, we Ellen. It shows up in my Facebook feed all the time. Yeah. Ellen and Treasure just presented at the National Aging Conference in March. I'm pretty sure only respite nonprofit that was presenting there. So they presented on Charlie's Place. And I got something from Mark's Council and it said that was something. But then yesterday at 5, 6, 7 minutes. Watch it, but I guess I got 8 minutes. I do too. That more. That's the day we try to look for the cost. Alrighty, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to everybody here in person and everybody that's on Zoom. My name is Brooke. I'm a program coordinator here at Alzheimer's Services. This is our second presentation of our spring Making Sense of Sense series. We have one more next week with our very own Marcia Kirk that's going to be talking about respite reimbursement. So be sure to attend that one too. If you haven't already registered, then definitely do that. We have an audience today, both in person and online, just like last week. And so for those on Zoom, you will be muted throughout the whole call. If you have any questions, you just put those in the chat box and then we'll read those out at the end. And we will be recording today's presentation. I know somebody had just mentioned that they didn't get to watch last week. That's already up on our YouTube channel. So if you ever miss one of our presentations, we very likely have it recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. I am very excited to welcome our presenter today, Miss Linda Melancon. She is the founder of Legacy Estate and Elder Law of Louisiana. And she is an attorney practicing in the areas of estate planning, elder law, Medicaid, and VA benefits planning, special needs planning, and estate administration. Linda is a longtime volunteer of Alzheimer's Services. She has participated with us within Making Sense of Sense for years now. And she regularly presents educational seminars for the public as well as professional groups on the importance of proper planning. So that's why we're all here today. She's going to present today on everything that we need to know to make an informed decision on how to protect yourself during the long-term care process and the costs that are associated with that. So without further ado, I will welcome Ms. Linton.
Thank you, Brooke. I don't know if you said this, but I've been doing this for a long time, so hence the gray hair. And I am going to talk about paying for long-term care today, and I'm going to talk about Medicare and how that may fit into the picture, Medicaid and VA benefits. I'm going to touch very briefly on long-term care insurance. So whenever I'm asked to present for Alzheimer's services or for another group, it's always difficult to decide what to talk about because I do have a lot of presentations like this. I've been doing this for a long time, but it seems like the one area where there is the most confusion is in paying for long-term care. I get the most questions about that when I meet with people in my office. I also hear the most things that are probably not accurate when we talk about long-term care. And so what I find is that people know a little bit, or they hear little pieces of the picture, but in order to put the whole picture together, you have to spend a lot of time. And so because I do this all the time, I've been able to put all those pieces together, I think. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm a member of several organizations that deal just with long-term care with elder law, and a member of something called the Elder Law Task Force here in Louisiana. So for most of us, we are going to go down this elder care continuum that I've got here. And so we're going to start out at home, and we're not going to have very many healthcare costs. Our insurance is going to pay for most of those costs. If we are over 65 and we're getting Medicare, we may have some co-pays, we may have some deductibles, some premiums, but for the most part, we're not going to have excessive healthcare costs. As we move along that continuum, we may need some assistance at home. In the beginning, that is often offered by family members, by neighbors, by relatives. Probably some of you here, some of you from the Zoom are doing that right now. You are offering services for free, but a lot of times those services are paid for, and so you start having some costs when people can't live independently. They need some help. As functioning becomes more limited, some people may decide to move to a retirement community. A retirement community is a place where you'll have an apartment, you'll have meals usually in a dining room. There may be a van that will take you to Walmart, to doctor's appointments, things like that, but there's not going to be any medical things provided there. And so the next step, maybe retirement community isn't the place that you need to be. Maybe you do need some assistance with activities of daily living, and that's when you'll be looking at an assisted living facility. As you move along this continuum, the costs are generally increasing. And so the last step that we see is we see people in a nursing home. A lot of times that's at the end of life. Maybe they have some type of condition where they can no longer be cared for in the community, can no longer be cared for in an assisted living facility, and so they need nursing home care. It may also be because they have run out of money, and that is the only place left where their care can be provided. Again, as we move along this continuum, costs are generally increasing. So what are the costs for long-term care? Well, in a 2020 study by Kaiser Permanente, actually this is a Genworth study, the average cost of nursing home care in the United States is $94,900. That's a little bit cheaper here in Louisiana. It's about $70,000. I'm seeing here in the greater Baton Rouge area, we're probably closer to $72,000, $75,000. I didn't mention this, but I see that some of you were writing notes. Inside that packet on your table, there is a handout of this presentation. So if you want to open it up and find it, you can write some notes on there, but you'll also already have those things. So an assisted living, here in Louisiana, you're looking at about 45,000 a year. But generally in assisted livings, the cost depends on the types of services that you're receiving. So if you are in an assisted living that has memory care, the costs are generally going to be higher. You probably are going to be looking at that 70 to 80, $90,000 range. If you need home care, you're talking about, again, around $45,000 a year, and that is for an 8-hour day. And so if you needed 24/7 care, you could triple that number, and you're looking at over $100,000 a year if you need home care. The cost of adult daycare in Louisiana is around $20,000. Here in the greater Baton Rouge area, there are not very many places that offer adult daycare. And so it's usually not an option here. So as you can see, the cost of long-term care is very expensive. And there's a lot of misconceptions about who pays for long-term care. A lot of people think that their health insurance will pay, but generally the answer is no. Disability insurance doesn't pay for long-term care. Disability insurance is an income replacement if you become disabled, but it doesn't actually pay for your costs of long-term care. Medicare has a very limited amount that it will pay after a hospital stay. Medicaid, if you qualify, will pay for nursing home costs here in Louisiana and some very limited care at home. Of course, you can pay out of pocket, but with the cost being so expensive, that can eat up somebody's savings very quickly. Long-term care insurance will pay for long-term care, and there are some VA benefits available to veterans and the surviving spouses of veterans that may pay for long-term care. So why do you need to know about this? As you can see, the costs are very expensive. They are going to continue to increase. They generally increase greater than the cost of inflation. It is unlikely that Medicare is going to have a larger part in this, at least not in the near future. And it's most people's fear that they're going to run out of money before they run out of time. So your challenge is to try to keep that from happening. As I said, Medicare has some very limited benefits, not actually for long-term care, but for rehabilitation. And that may take place in a nursing home or another long-term care facility. But Medicare Part A is your hospitalization, and almost everyone has Medicare Part A that is over 65, pays for your hospitalization, hospice care, certain in-home care, and it is an entitlement. You get that Medicare Part A just by having worked. Medicare Part B, it covers your doctor's visits and some types of therapy, certain outpatient. You pay a monthly premium for Medicare Part B. Medicare Part C is a private advantage plan where they've combined all of those services together. And I see a lot of people in this area who have a Medicare Part C or an advantage plan. A lot of times they don't even know that that's what they have. But Humana, People's Health, Blue Cross Blue Shield offers an advantage plan right now. But what that is that the government is paying a private insurer to provide those services that you would normally get under Medicare Part A, Part B, Part D. Part D is your prescription drug coverage. And then there is some rehab, again, that might take place in a nursing home that Medicare will pay for. And so if you have a 3-day stay in a 3-day stay in a hospital and you are discharged to rehab, then Medicare will pick up the first 20 days at 100%. From days 21 to 100, they will pick up a small portion. Your private insurance may pick up the difference, but it is only as long as you are improving with rehab. So if you get to day 25 and your doctors or healthcare providers say that you've reached your maximum level of improvement, then Medicare, your health insurance, your advantage plan, your Part B, they're not going to continue to pay for that type of care. So the maximum is 100 days. After 100 days, even if you were still improving with that type of care, if you can't go home and live alone anymore, you can't go home and live with someone, you don't have care at home, and you have to stay in a long-term care facility, then Medicare, your private insurance is not going to pay anything for that type of care. And that's when you're looking at long-term care costs. So as you probably know, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, they're all diseases of a long trajectory. And so someone may be diagnosed with one of those diseases and they're going to live for many, many years thereafter. There may be a point in time where they're not able to live independently anymore. They need the services of someone to provide long-term care. And so it's just a decision that the government has made that we're not going to provide that under Medicare. If you have a heart condition, you need a heart replacement, then Medicare is going to cover those costs. If you have a disease where you can no longer function, you can no longer take care of your activities of daily living, Medicare is not going to pay for that type of care indefinitely. So let's look a little bit at long-term care insurance. It is likely most of the people who are listening to this or who on the Zoom call, it's probably too late if they are taking care of someone to purchase long-term care insurance for them. But it's good to know because you've seen what this has done to your family, to your loved ones, how that care is needed. It's good to know how you can protect yourself. And one way you can do that is through long-term care insurance. There are a couple of different types of long-term care insurance. There's a traditional long-term care insurance policy, which is just a policy where you pay a premium. That may be a monthly premium, it might be a quarterly premium, it might be an annual premium. If you ever need long-term care, then that insurance policy is going to step in and pay for those costs. If you never need it, if you pay premiums for 30 years and you never have a need for long-term care, you're just going to lose those premiums. Even that most people didn't like the concept of a traditional long-term care policy, and most people didn't buy those things. There is also another type of product called a hybrid product, and that is long-term care insurance based on either a life insurance contract or an annuity contract. And so you're going to take a sum of money and you're going to put it into this long-term care product. And if you ever need care, then that long-term care insurance is going to kick in. If you don't ever need care, then that money, that initial investment is going to be returned to the family and to whoever needs to take it one of these things. Because of this, these hybrid policies are much more agreeable to people. There's still going to be a cost associated with the long-term care insurance. But at least you will know that you don't lose everything you've invested if you never have any long-term care. And so if you are young enough, if you are healthy, then you may want to consider long-term care insurance. Again, probably most of the people here were here because they have a loved one that has a care need, and it's too late to purchase a long-term care insurance product for them, regardless of what type that is. And so we're going to need to look at another source of funding for long-term care. And the first source of funding, and I think the one that has the most misconceptions about it, is Medicaid. And so Medicaid is a federal-state partnership. So some of the rules are federal rules, some of the rules are state rules, and it's managed here in Louisiana by the Department of Hospitals, DHH, and the Medicaid agency. And so in order to qualify for Medicaid, you have to meet certain financial requirements. There is an asset limit for a single person who needs Medicaid. And that asset limit is $2,000 in countable resources or countable assets. I'm going to tell you in just a minute what is countable, what's not countable. If a person is married, their spouse who is not in a nursing home can have an additional $148,620 in countable assets. This number, the amount that a married person, the spouse outside of the nursing home can keep, increases every year with the cost of living. So there was a very big increase in 2023 because the cost of living increased so much. The house is not counted if it's worth less than $688,000. There is a transfer penalty of 1 month for every $5,000 that you give away. And that transfer penalty starts on the day that you make an application for Medicaid when you're in a nursing home. So for most purposes, if we're talking about Medicaid here in Louisiana, we're talking about nursing home care. Medicaid does have something called home and community-based services where Medicaid will provide care in the home. But the need for care in the home, those home and community-based services, is much larger than Louisiana's ability to provide those types of services. And so most people who are receiving Medicaid here in Louisiana are doing so in a nursing home. There is a 5-year look back. And so if you enter a nursing home and you file a Medicaid application, they're going to ask you if you've given away any assets in the last 5 years. If you have, then this penalty period is going to come into play. And I'm going to explain all of these things in a little more detail here in just a minute. These are just the basics. So what is countable income? Well, income, let me back up just a minute. I missed the income slide. Income for the person who needs nursing home care, they have to have less than $27.42 a month in income to be eligible Medicaid, long-term care services, or to be what Medicaid calls categorically eligible. So if their monthly income is less than $27.42, they are categorically eligible for Medicaid long-term care services on the income part of the test. Now, if their income is greater than $27.42, they may still be eligible under something called the medically needy spend down program. And so if their income is greater than the $27.42, and that is also a number that changes every year, it's greater than the $27.42, but less than the cost of care in the facility, you may still be eligible under the medically needy spend down program. So what is income? Well, all gross income, both earned income and unearned income, is counted. So you may have interest, dividends, things like that are unearned income. Those things are going to be counted. Income, though, is attributable to the person whose name is on the check. Now, when I started doing this seminar back in 2006, I guess I've been doing it a long time, we actually got checks. We don't get checks in the mail anymore, but income is attributable to the person that is made payable to. So if it is a automatic deposit into your bank account, if it's in your name solely, then income is going to be attributable to you. And Medicaid is only counting the income of the person who needs nursing home care. They are not counting the income of the spouse. When we get to assets, we're going to see that the rule is different. But for income purposes, it's going to be the income of the person who needs nursing home care that's going to be counted. And the spouse's income, if you have a spouse who is not in a nursing home, then their income can be of any amount. So what are countable resources? Well, basically anything that you can convert to cash is a countable resource. All of your bank accounts, your CDs, your investment accounts, your whole life insurance policies or your universal life insurance policies. Any type of life insurance policy that has a cash value is countable for Medicaid purposes. Term life insurance doesn't have a cash value, is not countable. All of your retirement assets are countable. Your IRAs, your 401ks, your 403bs, your 457. All of those types of retirement assets are countable. Annuities are countable. Real estate other than your home is countable. And assets that are held in a revocable trust are countable. And so sometimes people create a revocable trust and they put their house in it. They put their house in there to avoid probate. If that house is titled in the name of the revocable trust, it's going to be a countable asset. Whereas if it's in your individual name, it's going to be a non-countable asset. So a lot of times when I'm doing planning for people, if they have a revocable trust and they need nursing home care, we have to take the house out of that trust in order to make it a non-countable asset again. So again, $2,000 in countable assets for the nursing home resident, an additional $148,620 for the spouse who's not in the nursing home. If you have two members, husband and wife, and they're both in the nursing home, then together they can only have $3,000 in countable. So it quickly goes from that $150,620 down to $3,000 for the spouse in the nursing home. And in my practice, I guess over the years, I've had 3 or 4 families that I've met with where both of the spouses were in the nursing home. So what's non-countable? Well, the home again is non-countable as long as the value is less than $688,000. But you also have to be aware of something called estate recovery. And so the house doesn't count when you go into the nursing home, but after the death of the surviving spouse, if there's a surviving spouse, Medicaid can come back and ask to be repaid from the assets in the estate. And generally the house is the only major asset that's left in the estate. I'm going to talk a little bit more about estate recovery too. One automobile of any value is not countable. Years and years ago, I had a client, he had numerous automobiles. Several of them were collector's automobiles, and he had I don't remember what it was, but it's like a 1958 Chevy something or another that was worth $1,000. That was the vehicle that he kept as his one non-countable asset. So he kept another vehicle to drive, but it was countable. And so it doesn't matter what the value of the automobile is. Your personal property up to the value of $2,000 is not countable, but for all practical purposes, nobody's going to count the value of your furniture, your pots and pans and things in your house. If you had some type of very valuable art collection, coin collection, gun collection, those things would be countable as personal property. Your wedding and engagement rings, they don't count those. It's really nice. And any assets that you use in your trade or business. Well, it's likely that if you need nursing home care, you're not using assets in a trade or business, but they do give an allowance for that. A prepaid burial or a cemetery plot is not countable. And so the cost of the burial, the funeral contract is not countable, along with the plot where you're buried is not countable. Life insurance with a cash value of less than $10,000 is not countable. Again, term insurance of any value is not countable. And assets that are held in an irrevocable trust. So if it's in a special needs trust, a pooled trust, or some other type of irrevocable trust, they are not countable for Medicaid purposes, unlike a revocable trust where they are countable. And the reason is because in a revocable trust, you can get any of those assets. And so since you can get those assets, Medicaid assumes that they're available to pay for care. If it's in an irrevocable trust, you can't go get those assets, and so they're not available to pay for care. So for most married persons, all of their assets, except their home, their car, their personal property, are countable assets. And that is regardless of whether it is separate property or community property here in Louisiana. Both of those things are countable. Medicaid considers that all of those assets are available to pay for the cost of care. Many years ago, I had a couple up in West Feliciana Parish. She had inherited about 100 acres of timber property. And so they didn't have any cash to pay for nursing home costs. Her husband needed nursing home costs. That was her separate property. but it either had to be sold or he couldn't care in a nursing home and didn't qualify for Medicaid and they didn't have any other assets to pay for it. They made a decision to take it off and he didn't want to sell the property. If you have joint owned accounts, you might have your name on there, your kid's name on there, and that's going to be considered. There's a presumption that all of the money in that account is going to belong to the Medicaid recipient unless you can prove differently. Unless you can your children actually put into that account. Medicaid isn't going to consider that money to belong to the person who needs Medicaid. So this is just an example of countable assets. And so if that single Sam here, he has a checking account with $10,000. He's got a CD with $25,000 that's joint with his son, but his son didn't actually contribute any of those funds. And he's got a condo that he owns outright that's worth $380,000. And so his countable assets are going to be that checking account and that CD. So he has total countable assets of $35,000. Well, he can only have $2,000 and qualify for Medicaid. And so he's going to have to spin down some assets or convert some of those assets from countable assets to non-countable or exempt assets. And so it may be that he doesn't have a burial plot or he doesn't have a funeral contract arranged, and he may be able to spend some of those things in order to get closer to that $2,000. Of course, he can spend that money on his care. He can pay private pay for his cost of nursing home costs until he gets to that $2,000. Got married Marvin here. Marvin has a checking account with $5,000. His wife Martha has a savings account with $8,000, and together they have a joint brokerage account with $145,000. All of those assets are going to be countable for Medicaid purposes. And so their total assets are 158. They have excess assets then of 9380. So that's the 158 minus the 15620 that they can keep together. So why can't I just give everything away? That's what people ask me all the time. I'm just going to give my house to my son. I'm just going to give my bank account to my daughter so that I can qualify for Medicaid. Well, it's going to be a recipe for disaster if you do that. And I've had to fix things a lot of times when people had given things away and then they needed nursing home care within the next 5 years. So one of the things that's going to happen is you've got that 5-year look back. And so if you give something away and you need care in a nursing home within 5 years, there's going to be a penalty period. There's also can be some very negative tax consequences of giving your property away. So you may have a house that you bought in 1970 and you paid $100,000 for it, and now it's worth $400,000. If you give that to your child and they later sell it, they're going to pay more income tax on that sale than if they got that house at your dad's. So you have to be very careful when you're transferring assets to make sure that you've taken into account any of the income tax consequences that go along with giving property away. You're also going to lose control over those assets if you give them away. Some of you may have children that you really trust, that you don't mind handing over your assets to. But some of you may have one or more children who you don't trust. I meet with clients every day, and I would say 50–60% of them have a child that has a drug problem, an alcohol problem, a gambling problem, or maybe they just don't like their spouse. I met with a client who was concerned about their daughter inheriting from them because they were concerned what her husband would do to her in order to get the money. And so there's all kinds of things that you have to worry about when you're giving your property away. You also have to worry about family dynamics. I've had cases before where somebody gave property to one family member with the understanding that when they died, that family member was going to give it to somebody else. How often do you think that happens? I had some sisters once, and their aunt and uncle left CDs to one of them and said, give half to your sister. Well, they ended up in court and fought over who was gonna get that money. Unfortunately, the lawyers got a lot more of it than they should have if they'd have had some proper planning. As I said, there's going to be a transfer penalty if you give away assets and you need care within 5 years after giving those assets away. And that transfer penalty is calculated by taking the value of what you gave away, and that value is going to be the appraised value. You can't say my house is worth $10. Medicaid is going to want to see an appraisal that says what the fair market value of that house is. They're going to take the value of that gift and they're going to divide it by $5,000. And that's just a divisor that they always use. It's always going to be $5,000 unless it increases, but it doesn't change based on who the person is. It's always that number. So if you give away $100,000 and you need nursing home care within the next 5 years, you divide that 100,000 by 5,000, and there's going to be a 20-month penalty where Medicaid is not going to pay for your care. Because the cost of care is closer to $6,000, if somebody has to pay for that cost of care during that 20-month penalty period, it's actually going to cost them more than the amount of money that was given away to pay for that care during that period of time. And that's why a lot of times I've had to go back and undo transactions, because it makes more sense to give the money back. It's going to cost more in the hands of the son or the daughter than it is in the hands of the parent who needs care. And then, as I told you, you're going to have to be concerned about estate recovery. So federal law requires that all states try to recover something for what they paid for nursing home care. And so usually when somebody enters a nursing home, if they can only have $2,000 in countable assets, the main thing that's going to be left in their estate when they die is their home. And so often after somebody dies, Medicaid is going to send a letter to their family, to their surviving spouse that says, we want our money back. We paid $250,000 for your care, and now we want to get that money back. They can't get it back while the surviving spouse is still alive. And I'm not sure they have a way to track it to see when the surviving spouse dies. But people get these letters all the time. Medicaid can't get back more than the value of the property. So if they paid $250,000, but the value of the house is only $125,000, they can only get back about $125,000. They can't get back more than what you paid. But when you're doing planning, particularly if you're doing advanced planning, and there isn't any type of crisis, you want to be concerned about, well, what happens? How can we keep away from this estate recovery? So are there planning strategies? Absolutely. If you do advanced planning, you're going to be able to preserve more assets if you later need nursing home care. So if you have somebody who you believe is not going to need assistance for 5 years or more, you'll be able to do some advanced planning. The way that we generally do that is using an irrevocable trust or what I call a Medicaid asset protection trust to remove property from the estate. Is that what everybody needs? Absolutely not. You have to be very careful. Again, there's consequences of transferring assets. A lot of times there's tax consequences of transferring assets. So you got to be very careful. You got to work with somebody who's very knowledgeable in this subject when you do any type of advanced planning, moving assets into a trust. So what if the house is on fire? What if I need care now? Are there any things that you can do? Generally, yes. But it's going to require an elder law attorney or somebody who does Medicaid planning very often to look at your assets, construct a plan to maximize the money and the options, and then to recommend strategies. And so if somebody tells you there is a one-size-fits-all for this, there is not. Again, one of the biggest issues is tax issues. A lot of times people have a lot of money in IRAs, and there's going to be some type of tax consequence of moving that money from an IRA. So you want to be very careful. But generally speaking, if someone needs nursing home care and they're a single person, there is a way to preserve about half of their assets. If they are a married person, generally speaking, there's a way to preserve most by moving things around, by taking things that are accountable for Medicaid purposes and not making them non-countable. There's also a lot of pitfalls that I see when we're talking about planning for long-term care. And so a lot of times I will meet with a married couple, or I will meet with the well spouse. Maybe the other spouse is unable to come to the appointment because they do have Alzheimer's, some other disease. Maybe they're in the hospital. Maybe they have had a stroke. They're not able to be engaged in the planning. And so one of the things that I see is that the well spouse has a plan that's going to leave everything to the spouse who's not well if they die. We likely want to change that plan because if they inherit from the spouse who's well spouse dies first, then those assets are just going to get used for long-term care. We want to make sure that the spouse who doesn't need care also has a plan in place. A lot of times I see plans with big gaps in them. I'll see a power of attorney that only has one agent name, and that agent may not be able to act. They may die themselves. They may get some type of illness where they're unable to act, and there is nobody else that can step in because that power of attorney didn't name anybody else to step in. In that case, we may have to have an interdiction, what most states would call a guardianship, in order to appoint somebody to make decisions for this person. So you want to make sure that power of attorney, you have an agent name, you also want to have one successor agent. I'm working on a power of attorney right now for a client that she thought only had one agent name, but when we read the document, we found out that her attorney, one who had prepared the document, had named herself as the backup or the successor agent, and it was not who she wanted at all. And so we're redoing her power of attorney. So what I see often is people who don't have any planning in place. And so in Louisiana, if you don't have any planning in place and you die, your spouse is going to get a usufruct for a right to use your property. That usufruct has a value, and so it could cause Medicaid ineligibility. Again, giving property outright to the spouse. And then another thing that I see very, very often is failure to change beneficiary designations. So people may remember, I need to change my will, I may need to change my power of attorney if somebody can't act anymore, but they may forget that a lot of those assets don't pass through the will. They're going to pass by a beneficiary designation. So life insurance, retirement plans, annuities. So you need to make sure that you've also taken care of those things. So that's a little bit about Medicaid. It may seem like a lot, but it really just touches a little bit of the law. It's kind of the things you need to start with. The Medicaid manual I have printed out in my office. It's 2 books about this tall. And so those are the general Medicaid rules. There are a lot of exceptions to the rules, and then there are just other planning strategies that you might need to know. So the second part of the presentation here is about VA benefits. And I call this part of the presentation missed opportunities because a lot of people aren't aware of these VA benefits. For me, myself, for my family, it was a missed opportunity. This is my father. He was in the service during the Korean conflict. He's deceased now, but at the end of his life, he had multiple strokes and he needed care. And my stepmother took care of him at home. But had I known about these benefits, he probably would have qualified, or we could have gotten him in a position where they could have qualified. So there's something called a VA pension with aid and attendance. And for a single veteran who needs long-term care, that can mean an additional $22.29 a month as the maximum amount. For a married veteran, they can get up to $26.42 a month for the maximum amount. By the way, that's my sister and her husband, and when she was much younger. And then for the surviving spouse may be only 1432 per month if they need long-term care. And so the VA has two things. They have something called compensation and they have something called pension. Compensation is like workers' comp. And so if you were injured during your military service, and as a result of that, you have an ongoing disability, you're entitled to something called compensation. There is something else called pension, which provides supplemental income to disabled or veterans who are disabled for reasons other than a service-connected injury. Some veterans could be eligible for both compensation and pension, but you can't get both. You can only get one or the other. Generally speaking, if someone has compensation and they're rated at a high disability, that compensation payment is going to be more than their pension payment, and so they're probably going to choose the compensation, but you're going to want to look at both of them and see which provides the most amount of money every month. So pension is the basic award or the basic amount of money that you're entitled to if you meet the criteria for the pension program. There is an add-on to pension called aid in attendance. So if you meet the basic criteria for pension, but you also need the aid in attendance of someone to help you with your activities of daily living, then the VA is going to increase your monthly amount that you get. So what are the requirements for the VA pension? First of all, you have to have wartime service, or you have to be the surviving spouse of someone who had wartime service and not be remarried. You have to be disabled or over 65. So the VA considers that if you're over 65, you're disabled. You also have to have limited income and limited assets. You have to have served at least 90 days of actual duty, not in the reserves, but as in the active duty. At least one of those days has to be during a war period, but you do not have to have served in a war zone. You don't have to have been in Korea or Vietnam or anywhere else, as long as you were in the service during a period of declared war. And you have to have other than a dishonorable discharge. So the dates, the beginning and ending dates for wars, World War II, 1941 to 1946. I seldom see World War II veterans anymore. I used to see them all the time when I first started practicing in this area of the law and heard some wonderful stories from them. But most of those people are gone. The Korean War, 1950 to 1955, Vietnam, 64 to 75 for those who served in the country, 61 to 75 for those who did not serve in the country. And then the Gulf War started in 1990, and it's still ongoing for purposes of this award. VA also has an income and an asset requirement. And so VA is not going to allow you to, if your income is more than the maximum monthly amount that you could get from VA, you're not going to qualify. And so if you are a wartime veteran and you don't have the aid in attendance, that basic monthly amount is $1336. So if your income is greater than that, you're not going to qualify. If you are a veteran and you need aid in attendance, your income can't be greater than $2229. If you're a married veteran who needs aid in attendance, your income can't be greater than $2642. Same thing with a surviving spouse. A surviving spouse in need of aid in attendance, their income can't be greater than $1432 a month in order to receive this benefit. Now, the difference is VA counts income different than you and I count income. And so while those amounts sound very low and it seems like no one would qualify, in actuality, income is usually not the problem. So VA is going to take the gross family income. Remember, Medicaid only took the income of the person who needed nursing home care. VA is going to take the income of the whole family, the husband, the wife, both of the spouses. If there are any other children living in the house, their income. They're going to subtract from that any unreimbursed medical expenses you have. And that is how you get income for VA purposes. So it's very easy to qualify on the income part of the test if you have long-term care costs. So if you have a couple who has gross income of $45,000 a year, but one of the spouses is in a nursing home and that's costing $60,000 a year, then they have negative income. Or if it's costing 45, if they have income of 45, unreimbursed medical expenses of 49, then for VA purposes, they have negative income. They don't have any income and they're going to qualify on the income part of the test. Same thing if you had a surviving spouse with $22,000 in income, that maybe they were paying for home care and that was $24,000 a year, and income is going to be, for VA purposes, is going to be zero, and they're going to qualify under the income test. The trick comes when you're looking at the asset test. Back in prior to 2018, VA didn't have an exact asset limit, but starting in 2018, they have a single dollar amount each year. This year, that number is $150,538. And so if you have greater than this 155.38, you're not going to qualify for the VA pension. Now, in addition to looking at your countable assets, VA is also going to add to that your annual income to get what your assets are for VA purposes. But remember, a lot of times the income is less than zero, so it's not going to be that big of an issue, but you are going to have the asset limit of 150. Like Medicaid, VA is not going to count your house and up to 2 acres. They're not going to count your personal effects. There are some other exclusions for VA purposes, a vehicle, but for most purposes, most of the things you own, the cash accounts, the CDs, the IRAs, all of those things are going to be countable for VA purposes, just like they were for Medicaid purposes. As I said, if you need the aid and attendance of someone, then the award is going to be greater. There's also something called housebound. So you may not need the aid and attendance of someone, but you may not be able to leave your house very often, except for doctor's appointments and things like that. That is also an award. It's between, the amount is between the basic pension and the aid and attendance award. It's a little less than the aid and attendance, but it's for someone who can't leave their home. Again, you have to be disabled, and to be disabled, you have to have one single disability at 100%, plus a second at 60%, or you have to be over 65. To be permanently housebound, you have to be substantially confined to your dwelling. You may be able to go out some, and it's going to have to continue throughout your lifetime. If you're blind or nearly blind, you're disabled. If you're in a nursing home or if you're unable to perform 2 activities of daily living, then you're disabled. Again, starting in 2018, VA changed their rules dramatically. And prior to that, there was no look back period. You could give away assets and you could qualify for this VA benefit immediately. In 2018, the VA imposed a 3-year look back period. And so if you apply for VA benefits, they're going to look back the prior 3 years and see if you made any gifts. If you did make gifts, there is going to be a penalty period imposed. Unlike Medicaid uses that $5,000 number, they're going to use the maximum amount that you could have received every month as the divisor. And so if it's a surviving spouse who has a lesser amount that they would get every month, their penalty period is going to be longer. The maximum penalty period for VA purposes, regardless of how much you give away, is $5,000. And so even if you take the amount given and you divide it by the maximum amount that somebody can receive every month, if that ends up more than 60 months, so 60 months is going to be the longest period of time. After that, you could apply for the VA benefit. So I got a little bit of time left, and I'll take questions. Yes.
I don't know if you can necessarily answer. It probably varies from person. When should someone start looking at purchasing long-term insurance?
Long-term care insurance is like like life insurance. The younger you are, the cheaper the rates are going to be. However, most people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s are not thinking about a long-term care event. And so probably when somebody's in their 50s, 60s, they're nearing retirement age, that's probably an ideal time to look at purchasing long-term care insurance or some type of long-term care product. So you'll want to talk to an insurance agent, but that is generally, once you get into your later 70s and 80s, the cost is prohibitive. And so there's kind of a sweet spot there between probably 50s and 70s.
I'm 80, so there's no point.
You can, you probably can get long-term care insurance. Most of the providers I have seen, there's a cutoff 82, 83 years old. However, the cost, of course, is going to be more expensive than it's going to be for somebody who's younger. So, yes.
Is dementia considered a 100% disability of any particular level?
For purposes
For veterans.
I'm sorry, for purposes of.
She's asking if dementia is considered 100% of a disability for veterans benefits.
You're not gonna. Are we talking about the pension that I was talking about? Or are we talking about compensation? What VA benefit?
Either way.
Either one. Compensation is again, it's like workers' comp. There are some diseases that are presumptively linked to exposure to certain things like Agent Orange in Vietnam. Dementia may be one of those things. And so you may qualify for compensation for the pension benefit. Dementia itself is not going to qualify you because there are lots of different degrees of dementia. And so someone may not need the assistance of somebody to help them with activities of daily living earlier in the process. But if that dementia has caused them to need assistance with activities of daily living, then yes, it will be enough to meet that criteria.
We got a question in the chat that said, are there certain kinds of illnesses or conditions requiring long-term care insurance that long-term care insurance or I guess long-term care Medicaid doesn't cover? Are there any illnesses that it doesn't cover?
Medicaid itself?
She's saying
Long-term
LTC,
care
so
insurance?
I'm assuming that's either,
There, and I'm not exactly sure, so I'm going to answer any question I can think of that might come out of that. How much? There are diseases that you can have that you're not going to be able to get long-term care insurance. If you have diabetes, you already have dementia, you have certain conditions that are likely to cause you to have a long-term care insurance and be able to get long-term care insurance. If you get long-term care insurance, there's not going to be any disease that it later will not cover that you get in the future. The same thing with Medicaid. If you're on Medicaid, it doesn't matter what your disease is, you're still going to be entitled to those Medicaid benefits. Hopefully that will answer.
yeah. So somebody asked how they can make an appointment with you. Before you answer that, I also do want to say that if you attend all 3 of these sessions within this series, of this one that we're doing right now in May, or we're going to do another one in November. If you attend all 3 sessions, then we pay for your first visit or a consultation with a participating elder law attorney. Linda Melancon is one of those attorneys. So if you attend all 3 of these sessions last week, today, and next week, we've got you covered there, and you just email us afterwards. But if you're brand new to us today, then I'll let Ms. Linda answer that.
me see if I have how about that? Is that okay? There's a slide that has our contact information on it. Certainly anybody can contact me. I have met with many, many families who have come through this program and who have come through Alzheimer's services. Let me just tell you, if you call my office directly, you're going to pay a consultation fee. If you come through Alzheimer's services because you've gone through those 3 programs, they're going to pick up the cost. I'm going to give them a discount, so it's a win-win for everybody. So,
What is your name?
my name is Linda Melissa. Should be in the materials.
Yeah, it's on your little paper in front of you.
What
Yeah,
should someone look for when they're looking at your insurance with the company?
Sorry.
She asked, what should someone look for within a long-term care insurance policy?
For a company, that's a good question and probably beyond the amount of time I have left. Certainly, my opinion, you're gonna want to, my opinion, offer you insurance from multiple companies. And so just like your car insurance, if you go to somebody who's an independent agent, they're gonna be able to offer you several different products from different companies. If you go to a financial advisor who is independent, they're gonna be able to offer you products, you're gonna be able to compare. And so you're not participating in one product. I have a whole presentation just on long-term care insurance. There's a lot of bells and whistles and things to be aware of when you're buying long-term care insurance. And so I'll have to come back and do that presentation.
So I know that you do a lot of presentations within the community. Do you post when you're doing those on your own social media or anything like that? If anybody wanted to attend another one of your presentations?
Social media for sure, on our Facebook page, also on our website. I can tell you, I currently don't have anything scheduled. My business manager, who also happens to be my daughter, was on me yesterday about ready to do some marketing. Let's get out there and do some things, but I've got a lot of other things on my plate. But we do generally do them several times a year. I do some presentations on just basic estate planning, your wills, your trust, things like that. Presentations on special needs planning for families with special needs members, legal issues affecting seniors, and this long-term care. And then, like I said, I have one just about long-term care insurance.
And if anybody is curious about some of our past Making Sense of Sense presentations that all have to do with dementia to some degree and financial aspects of caregiving, we do have a lot of those past presentations on our YouTube channel. So you can just go to youtube.com and look up Alzheimer's Services of the Capital Area. We may even have one of Linda's in the past up on there, but we definitely have some of our past Making Sense folks too.
Maybe you have one when I still had brown hair.
Good deal. So we're just at 1 o'clock. Did you have any closing remarks? We have a lot of people in the chat that are just saying, thank you so much for your presentation, great information. And thank you so much for all of this information today. It was very informative.
I think that's about it. Just make sure you work with people who are qualified to tell you about this stuff, so you get the right information.
I don't think I've seen your meeting or not, but I didn't know whether, when did you leave?
Most of our presentations, any of our educational presentations, we record it and we post them on our YouTube channel.
How do you do it?
Do you have the YouTube app on your phone?
Right.
Well, actually,
I can